Something happened on a single night in late March of 2026 that most of the world's governments have not yet fully processed. Not the explosion itself, though what detonated beneath those mountains sent shockwaves registering on instruments thousands of kilometers away. What they haven't processed is what it means. What it reveals about the invisible architecture of global power. What it tells us about who is truly safe in this world and who only believed they were. You are watching Nexa World Brief, and what you're about to hear is not a story about one country, one war, or one night. It is a story about the moment a fundamental assumption of modern military strategy, an assumption that billions of dollars and 4 decades of engineering had been poured into, was quietly and permanently proven wrong. Stay with me, because once you understand what actually happened and why, you will never look at a mountain the same way again. For decades, the Islamic Republic of Iran operated under a doctrine that was, in its own strange way, rational. The logic went something like this. The surface world is exposed, vulnerable, and ultimately controllable by your enemies. But the earth itself, the ancient rock beneath your feet, the compressed limestone and granite of the Zagros mountain range, that cannot be taken from you. That is yours. And so Iran built downward, year after year, through sanctions and isolation and 3 different American administrations that threatened and postured and ultimately did nothing permanent. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps directed an extraordinary engineering campaign into the belly of their own land. Underground tunnel cities stretching for kilometers. Reinforced chambers carved beneath hundreds of meters of solid mountain. Missile assembly floors operating in near total secrecy. Engine test stands buried so deep that even the most advanced satellite imagery could only guess at their existence. This was not paranoia. This was strategy. And for a long time it worked. The surface was where Iran bled. The underground was where Iran endured. When airstrikes came, and they did periodically from various directions over the years, the damage was real but recoverable. Launch pads could be rebuilt, command structures could be relocated, but the factories beneath the rock kept humming. The propulsion laboratories beneath the mountains kept refining. The stockpiles hidden within reinforced caverns kept growing. The logic was devastatingly simple. You cannot destroy what you cannot reach. And for 4 decades, that logic held. Right up until the night it didn't. To understand the rupture, you first have to understand what the weeks before it looked like. Beginning in late February of 2026, a coalition led by the United States launched what would become the largest coordinated military campaign in the region in over 2 decades. In the first day alone, more than 1,000 targets across Iran were struck simultaneously. Air defense networks that had been constructed with Russian and Chinese technical assistance, layered systems designed to complicate exactly this kind of operation, were methodically neutralized. Electronic warfare infrastructure went dark. Command and control nodes for the Revolutionary Guard collapsed. Iran's naval surface fleet, which had spent years positioning itself as a credible threat to one of the world's most critical maritime choke points, was largely erased from the water within weeks. Warships burned at anchor. A drone carrier went down at sea. Submarines that had operated in the Persian Gulf for years found themselves on the ocean floor. In terms of surface military power, the campaign was devastating, comprehensive, and historically unprecedented in its speed. But the underground remained. And everyone knew it. Iranian commanders watching their surface infrastructure collapse knew it too, which is precisely why they had built it. The production lines beneath the mountains were still running. The missile assembly chambers were still operational. The propulsion testing facilities were still intact. The stockpiles of anti-ship weapons positioned to threaten the flow of roughly 20% of the world's oil supply through the Strait of Hormuz were still waiting. The surface war had been won. The deeper war had not yet been fought, and this is where something unprecedented entered the equation. Before the night of March 27, 2026, there were exactly 2 aircraft in the world capable of carrying out what was about to happen. The B-2 Spirit, a bomber so advanced and so expensive that only 21 were ever built, each carrying a price tag approaching $2 billion. And the B-21 Raider, the newest American stealth bomber, a platform so modern that it had never before been used in actual combat. 6 of these aircraft, 4 B-2 Spirits and 2 B-21 Raiders, lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in the American Midwest. No escort, No fanfare, no public announcement, just 6 aircraft flying east in electronic silence, refueling in midair over the Atlantic and then the Mediterranean, maintaining a radar signature so small that the degraded Iranian air defense network that had survived previous strikes detected nothing at all. They carried a weapon specifically engineered for this kind of moment. The WW-57, known in military circles as the massive ordnance penetrator, is in a category almost entirely by itself. Weighing 15 tons per bomb, its hardened steel casing is designed to survive the friction and pressure of punching through layers of reinforced concrete and solid rock before its delayed fuse triggers at depth. It can penetrate approximately 60 meters of earth, or the equivalent in hardened concrete, before detonating. Its guidance system maintains accuracy to within meters of its programmed target even after traveling through hundreds of feet of mountain. No other aircraft in the world has the combination of payload capacity, stealth, and intercontinental range required to deliver it. The 6 bombers carried 7 of them, and each one was assigned to a specific node in Iran's underground industrial ecosystem. Here is the part that military strategists are still quietly studying. The targeting logic of what happened that night was not simply about destruction. It was about something more precise and far more dangerous to any nation that builds its strategic security on underground infrastructure. It was about severing chains. A ballistic missile is not a single object. It is the final product of an interlocking industrial process that begins with raw materials, passes through manufacturing floors where guidance electronics are assembled and calibrated, moves into propulsion chambers where engines are built and tested under enormous pressure, proceeds to final assembly areas where complete weapons are integrated, and ends in storage facilities where finished systems wait for deployment. Break one link in that chain and production slows. Break all the critical links simultaneously, in a window so narrow that no command authority has time to respond or relocate, and you do not merely damage a military program. You sever its ability to reconstitute itself at all. The first bomb fell on a final missile assembly complex buried beneath approximately 50 meters of mountain in the highlands near Tehran. A facility that had taken nearly 2 decades and hundreds of millions of dollars to construct ceased to exist in the seconds following detonation. Seismic instruments across the region registered the event. Satellite imagery in the following days confirmed surface subsidence, the land itself sinking where the underground chamber had collapsed. The second weapon struck a rocket engine test complex in Isfahan province, the heart of Iran's propulsion development program. The third targeted a component production facility in the Yazd region, the site responsible for guidance systems and advanced electronics not only for Iran's own arsenal, but for the weapons Iran had been supplying to allied proxy forces across the Middle East for years. The fourth strike hit a coastal storage depot near the Strait of Hormuz, triggering a chain of secondary explosions as stockpiled anti-ship missiles cooked off in cascading sequence. The fires burned for hours. All 7 bombs dropped within a 22-minute window. Not one of the 6 aircraft was detected. Not one was intercepted. The entire strike package returned to base after more than 24 hours continuously airborne. And when the sun came up over Iran on March 28th, the underground empire that had been built across 4 decades, the empire that was supposed to make Iran permanently untouchable, had been structurally dismantled in a single night. What followed was, in some ways, even more strategically significant than the strikes themselves. Because destruction and recovery are 2 different problems, and the coalition addressed both. Iranian engineering teams that moved to begin clearing debris and reopening tunnels found themselves immediately targeted by persistent drone surveillance and precision follow-on strikes. Excavation equipment became a military target. Repair convoys became a military target. The message was clear and deliberately so. There would be no rebuilding. The temporary destruction would be made permanent through sustained denial of recovery operations. In the history of modern warfare, the ability to prevent reconstruction has often proven as strategically decisive as the original act of destruction. This campaign applied that principle with systematic rigor. The downstream consequences extended far beyond Iran's borders. For years, proxy networks across the region, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, had depended on a steady resupply pipeline flowing from Iranian production facilities. Hezbollah's missile arsenal, the Houthis drone and ballistic capabilities, Shia militia stockpiles throughout the Fertile Crescent, all of it was sustained by the same underground industrial ecosystem that had just been collapsed. With the source severed, the flow stopped. Proxy forces that had operated with the confidence of reliable resupply suddenly found themselves managing dwindling inventories with no clear path to replenishment. The deterrent calculus of every Iranian-aligned actor in the region shifted in ways that are still being assessed. Iran's economic leverage over the global energy system, specifically its capacity to threaten traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, was similarly degraded to a level unprecedented in recent memory. The anti-ship missile stockpiles designed for exactly that threat were largely destroyed. Naval mine-laying vessels were gone. Coastal launch infrastructure was in ruins. The ability to hold 20% of the world's daily oil supply hostage, the ultimate leverage card in Tehran's strategic hand for a generation, had been physically dismantled. Global energy markets registered the shift. So did the governments of every nation whose economic stability depends directly or indirectly on the uninterrupted flow of Gulf hydrocarbons. But the deepest implications of what happened that night are not regional. They are global, and they are forcing conversations in defense ministries and strategic planning offices that nobody in those institutions particularly wants to be having. China has invested enormous resources in hardened underground facilities, particularly on Hainan Island, where submarine berths carved into rock shelter nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarines that form a critical component of Beijing's second strike deterrent. Russia maintains hardened mountain complexes in the Ural region, some of which were designed to function even under nuclear exchange conditions. North Korea has constructed what may be the world's most extensive underground military architecture, an entire parallel nation built beneath its mountains, sheltering artillery, missiles, and production facilities that the regime has long presented as effectively immune to conventional attack. All three of these powers watched what happened beneath Iran's mountains in March of 2026, and all three are now quietly recalculating. The assumption they shared with Iran, that sufficient depth means strategic safety, that burying your most critical capabilities under enough rock makes them unreachable by conventional means, has been empirically tested. The test result was not ambiguous. 6 aircraft flying from the American Midwest using 7 weapons permanently neutralized an underground military-industrial complex that a sovereign nation had spent 40 years and untold billions constructing. That is not a minor tactical development. That is a structural shift in what conventional air power can achieve, and therefore a structural shift in what underground fortification can and cannot protect. The harder question, the one that defense planners are genuinely grappling with, is whether the response to this demonstration will be adaptation or escalation. Will major powers begin dispersing their underground facilities so radically that no single strike package can cover enough nodes simultaneously? Will they develop deeper construction techniques, engineering solutions that push critical infrastructure beyond even the WW3's penetration capability? Will they invest in hardened reconstruction capacity, the ability to rebuild so quickly that sustained denial operations become economically unsustainable for the attacker? Or will they draw a different conclusion entirely, that certain capabilities can no longer be secured by geography alone, and that the entire model of underground strategic infrastructure needs to be rethought from first principles? There is no clean answer, because here is the uncomfortable reality that sits beneath all of it. The same technological convergence that made March 27th possible, stealth aircraft that can traverse contested airspace undetected, precision navigation that maintains accuracy through hundreds of feet of rock, intelligence systems capable of mapping underground industrial ecosystems with sufficient granularity to identify and prioritize specific nodes, that convergence is not standing still. It is accelerating. What was theoretically possible in 2026 will be operationally routine within a decade. What requires 6 specially built aircraft today may require far fewer tomorrow. The physics of underground protection have not changed. The tools available to overcome that protection are changing constantly. On April 7, 2026, Iran agreed to a ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The formal diplomatic language described it as a negotiated pause. The underlying reality was a regime stripped of its navy, its underground production capacity, its proxy resupply pipeline, and its maritime leverage, forced to the table not by ideology or politics, but by the physical elimination of the infrastructure on which its entire strategic position rested. The mountains had not protected what was inside them, and the regime that had told its people and its military commanders for 4 decades that the underground was inviolable now had to reckon with the gap between that promise and the seismic evidence of its failure. Whether the ceasefire holds, whether it becomes the beginning of something genuinely different in the region's security architecture, or merely a pause while Tehran quietly begins the long process of rebuilding what was lost, is a question that nobody can answer with confidence today. What can be said with confidence is that the strategic landscape has shifted in ways that are not easily reversible. The myth of the indestructible underground is gone. The industrial DNA of a military program, not just its weapons but its ability to produce weapons, has been proven vulnerable to conventional precision power at distances that make geographic isolation meaningless. Before this campaign, depth was a sanctuary. After it, depth is simply a variable in a targeting calculation. So here is the question I want to leave you with, and I want you to think about it seriously because it doesn't have an obvious answer. If the era in which underground fortification provides reliable strategic sanctuary is truly ending, what replaces it? What doctrine, what architecture, what form of deterrence fills the gap that has just been torn open? And for the nations that have staked their long-term security on exactly the model that Iran's underground empire represented, is the lesson of March 2026 that they need to build differently or that they need to think differently about security itself? Drop your perspective in the comments. This is exactly the kind of question that deserves a real conversation. And if this kind of deep, unfiltered analysis is what you come here for, then subscribe to Nexa World Brief, because the shifts happening right now are moving faster than most people realize, and we are going to track every one of them together.